presentation.
Hey everybody, what's going on? Man, it's good to be back on the interwebs, and thank you once again for choosing B30 for your listening pleasure. So if you're not familiar with combat sports, then maybe this session isn't really for you. But whether you want to recognize it or not, mixed martial arts, MMA for short, is one of the fastest growing sports worldwide, especially the 18 to 34 age demographic, and it's pretty strong among the age 4 to 17 group as well too. I mean, next to soccer, it's probably the most universal sport that transcends language and cultural barriers. I mean, two people walk into a cage, the person who is unconscious quits or is unable to continue due to injury is the loser. Doesn't get any simpler than that. Let me remind you, this sport has evolved, so it's no longer an organized bar brawling or human cockfighting event. There's no biting, foot stomps, eye gouges, and groin strikes, nothing like that. I'm talking athletic commission sanctioned rules and weight classes, very legitimate like boxing, judo, or wrestling tournaments. So the question here is, should the church, in its zeal to reach the unsaved, use a combat sport like MMA to share the gospel and, for a lack of a better word, lure or entice the younger generations back into faith with cage fighting? Thus, the film documentary Fight Church came about to tackle this issue. So basically, renowned and award-winning filmmakers and directors came together, shot this documentary to share the story of how several churches in the southern U.S. believe that MMA is a great tool to make Christianity relevant and relatable to the young male demographic. And that's due to a general trend in the churches across North America where the presence of the 18 to 34-year-old males in the church isn't as strong as it used to be. So the Christian MMA fight clubs currently operating, they see their ministries as meaningful due to the following reasons. So the first one is, tough guys need Jesus is their motto. They argue that conventional Christian culture lacks a certain amount of masculinity or manliness about it. One of the Christian pastors slash Fight Club head trainers, John Renkin, from the Fight Church movie trailer, even goes on to say that mainstream Christianity has feminized men. It's funny when Pastor Renkin made that comment in the film trailer. The trailer shows him teaching a boy, like no more than 10 years old, wearing glasses, how to fire his weapon at a gun range. I'm probably guessing it's a 9mm Glock or something. And the thing is, you can see the poor kid's head and torso like jolt back every time he fires his weapon. And judging by his facial expression, it didn't seem like the kid was enjoying that aspect of firing guns per se. But basically, supporters of Christian MMA fight clubs may say that MMA ministries are a good tool to recapture that noble masculine gender role that has slowly disappeared since the late 20th century. So it's basically this anti-metrosexual, anti-emo persona movement that has the potential to boost the Christian image among male non-believers. Okay, I get it. You want to minister to a particular gender and age demographic that's been dropping off in the Christian community the past couple decades. I get that. But do you have to use such an extreme, violent, and gruesome sport to accomplish that? Last I checked, Christianity does not condone violence. And you're telling me, you, as in these MMA fight clubs, are endorsing a sport where you're not only trying to submit your opponent with a chokehold or some sort of arm or leg lock, you're also trying to inflict maximum damage with punches, kicks, knees, and elbows as well. And former U.S. kickboxing champion and theologian Scott Sullivan in the Fight Church trailer kind of picked up on that and honestly admitted, as I progressed in my Christian life, I started to see a conflict. Father John Duffel, also in the film trailer, said very plainly that cage fighting is hate. He goes on to explain, the tradition, brackets, he's probably referring to Christianity, of which I'm a part, is that we love one another. And this, referring to MMA, isn't or ain't love. And I have to admit, Father Duffel makes a strong case, especially when the film trailer shows a Christian MMA competitor making a throat-slashing gesture after like a very dominant victory over his opponent. Well, I'm sure these pastors in these MMA ministries would admit to that conflict between faith and combat sports. But Pastor John Renkin had this to say: at the end of the day, it's about reaching people with the gospel, regardless of what you do, to introduce them into a relationship with Jesus Christ. I respect Pastor Renkin's zeal to spread the gospel, but if you're going to make a bold statement saying it's about reaching people with the gospel, regardless of what you do, to introduce them to Jesus, well, with that line of reasoning, I could start, I don't know, a bath salts or crack cocaine using club to outreach non-believers, since it's about reaching people with the gospel regardless of what I do, right? That's why I think Pastor Renkin should have some scriptural reference to back up his statement to support the overall validity of mixing combat sports and Christian faith together. But pastor/MMA competitor Nashawn Nix, on the other hand, defends the union of Christianity and MMA in the documentary trailer by saying, "Tonight we're going to fight, but tomorrow we're going to talk about Jesus when we're at church." So the implication here is the violence and aggression you see in the cage is purely in a competitive and sports context. It's the what happens in the cage stays in the cage kind of mindset. So what Pastor Nix is basically saying is, what I do in the cage is not who I am on Sunday mornings when I'm preaching to my congregation. MMA fitness and competition is an aspect of Pastor Nix's self-identity, but so is his identity as a Christian and a pastor. So, to recap, the arguments from both sides thus far is the violence, the aggression, the hatred that is found in MMA should have no part of the Christian message, but these so-called fight churches see the competitive aspects of combat sports like MMA as a great tool to teach life skills, discourage femininity, promote codes of conduct like honor and sportsmanship, and more importantly, provide a safe environment where men can express or release their aggression and emotions without getting in trouble with the law. And not to mention, like all athletic pursuits, MMA also enhances personal health and fitness. Now, what I find most interesting about this topic is, what do professional mixed martial artists themselves think about mixing MMA and religious faith together? Well, two very successful mixed martial artists who so happen to be Christians offered an interesting perspective. Former UFC lightweight champion Benson Henderson said, "I carry my faith with me into the cage." Reigning UFC light heavyweight champion John Jones stated, "I probably wouldn't be in the position I am today if I wasn't a Christian." Now, these two gentlemen, they didn't really approve or disapprove of religion and MMA going together, but the common theme here is their religious faith gave them the frame of mind and emotional/spiritual calmness to thrive at their profession. It's almost as if Christianity gave them a psycho-emotional and spiritual edge in preparing their hearts, minds, and bodies in the realm of mixed martial arts. Okay, so far I've outlined the main arguments of the skeptics and supporters of Christian MMA ministries, as well as the point of view from professional MMA athletes. So maybe some of you listeners are wondering, what do I personally think? Well, I've been watching and studying MMA for almost 10 years now. I've trained a bit in the fitness aspects of it, and you factor in my social science, theological background, I guess I'm one of those people who can identify with the skeptics and supporters of the sport. And my first concern here is how MMA ministries want to reinforce these really rigid definitions of masculinity. So the leaders of these Christian fight clubs in the film trailer are firm believers in the "man make money, woman stay home, we shoot guns, punch people, no read books and knitting." Okay, that's kind of exaggeration, but you get what I'm saying. They have this pretty narrow concept of male gender roles. But all kidding aside, I think one concerning image in the film trailer was this young boy, no more than 12, who had this worried look on his face as Pastor Paul Burris and the trainers were helping him put on his boxing mitts and headgear for what I believe is a sparring session. So the kid proceeds to start the round, and he's throwing heavy punches with another kid, and they're just wailing on each other. And then the video cuts to that kid in between rounds in his corner, and he's like crying and sobbing, like, okay, I don't want any part of this anymore. But then Pastor Paul and the cornermen were like bombarding him with all these words to encourage him and or urge him to keep going. So it just makes you wonder, is it possible that these ministries are a little too eager in forcing young boys to live up to these hyper masculine expectations that these men in their late 30s and 40s have for this generation? To be fair though, there isn't much context in the 3 to 5 second clip in the film trailer, so maybe these young boys wanted to do this, and the head trainer / pastors were just teaching them the value of perseverance when you feel like quitting. But it becomes unclear whether Christian fight clubs want to spread the gospel, or do they simply just want to start a movement for men to rediscover their rugged, hyper-masculine roots. Or maybe they want to kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, and spread the gospel and enforce traditional gender roles. Well, what happens to the young males who are like into comic books and art and poetry? Won't they get left out of the picture or fall through the cracks under this evangelization approach because they don't like shooting guns or punching people in the face for fun? So I'm just putting it out there. Oh, and another point I want to make is to address that statement where MMA is all about hatred. I would admit that MMA is a violent sport. It is a competition that challenges an individual's toughness to find out how far one can push oneself while withstanding physical punishment and trying to out-strategize and outlast your opponent. But there is a false correlation between hatred and aggression. I mean, a typical angry, jacked up, hulking guy with nothing but hatred and blind rage in his heart or mind who likes to inflict pain on others, the juicer / bully type, 9 out of 10 times, these personalities don't last long in MMA competition. They often tire themselves out, or get caught in a submission, or get out-strategized and picked apart by their calmer and more methodical opponents. I mean, the upper echelon of mixed martial artists who hold world titles often are the most intelligent, cerebral, well-conditioned, athletic, and more importantly, the most spiritually and emotionally in-tuned individuals at their craft. I mean, if you take away the bravado, the sweat, the blood, the muscles, the testosterone-driven atmosphere, the elite fighters in MMA are the ones who are most fluid, dynamic, with a perfect integration of skill, technique, and strategy. And more importantly, they have this ability to harness their raw aggression and channel it into this pure form of athleticism. That's why mixed martial arts, at its most basic element, is philosophical in nature. And MMA practitioners who take their craft seriously will reach that conclusion or realization one way or another. Therefore, hatred and blind aggression is generally avoided in MMA. That's why I kind of disagree with Father or Pastor Duffel when he commented that cage fighting is all about hatred. So you're probably thinking, all right, answer the question already. Should MMA and Christianity go together? Well, personally, I don't think they should go together, in the sense that you convert a church into a fight club or something. I think you can treat an MMA training facility as a potential missions opportunity or destination. So you send Christian MMA enthusiasts to train there, and then maybe you provide them a service like, teach them English or something, because a lot of these instructors, grappling instructors or striking instructors, they come from overseas, Thailand or Brazil. So you can also offer a practical service to them. And then that can be your avenue to invite them into church. But I can see how the church would cut out the middleman, so to speak, and just start their own MMA training facility that's affiliated with the church and maybe implement like a mandatory small groups or Bible study session policy. But final answer, I would say no. There's just too many liability issues and complications having a fight church. I mean, if someone breaks a leg or gets seriously concussed on your property, and in terms of the people who show up at these fight churches, maybe some of the first timers or non-believers are not that much into your code of honor or rules in the gym, and things could get nasty, and who knows. Yeah, there's just a lot of legal and health and safety issues if it was to move forward. But one last point I want to make before I wrap up is I found it really troubling in the film trailer how these fight pastors are relying really heavily on martial arts imagery and fight language to convey biblical concepts when they were preaching. I mean, I get it. If you're a local church and you employ a senior pastor that happens to be a semi-professional MMA fighter, you have a pretty marketable product. For example, Pastor Preston Hawker in the film trailer was wearing like boxing glove hand wraps while he was delivering his sermon and joking about himself fighting another pastor / semi-professional MMA fighter as an icebreaker. But all kidding aside, is there an issue with using this war and combat language to explain and convey biblical concepts? And I keep bringing that question up because Pastor Nashawn Nix in the film trailer, when he was preaching to his congregation, he said, if you really want your enemy off your trail, you got to learn to put your foot on his neck. And then he said, somebody shout Jesus. No joke, that's what he said. I get the whole fiery, passionate preacher persona, but really? Putting your foot on your enemy's neck. Somebody shout Jesus? As if Jesus would agree with your interpretation of his scripture. I do not know what part of scripture you're quoting. Maybe Old Testament. There's a lot of wars and whatnot. But to be fair, there is no real context of why he was saying those words during a sermon. But foot on the neck isn't exactly the Christian message you want to condone to a large amount of people in such a public setting. Am I right? As you can see, this is going to be one of those topics that I can ramble on for hours on end. So let me conclude by using the closing question the film trailer used itself. Can you love your neighbor as yourself and smash him in the face as hard as you can? Okay, folks, that's all I have to say for now. Follow B30 on Facebook and Twitter for the latest news and updates. Details are in the video description below. All right, folks, show's over. Bye.